Who is the Buddha? What did the Buddha have to express on contentment, on this amazing truth that the Buddha shared called Tendel? Buddha nature. Would Rinpoche be so kind as to share with us what we are to understand from the statement that all sentient beings possess the Buddha nature, shunyata, and in English, emptiness? Is there a shortcut to nirvana?
Yes, that's beautiful, Doctor. And I mean, I got to get a taste of what Doctor what the transformative experience must have been for Doctor, and I hope the audience as well can draw from Doctor's experience, because so many a times, I mean, we are so locked up. We look at parents and we don't see a woman or a man behind it. We tend to see our dad, mom, labels, and we can't really connect with people. And thank you, Doctor, for that. Any other milestone that anything that comes to mind that Doctor would like to share with us?
Another experience maybe that actually was one of the reasons why I later decided to go to Bhutan was during my time at the Red Cross. I was in Darfur, in West Sudan, a country that has gone through a tremendous civil war. 2 million people died there. At that time when I was there, it was a very terrible situation. We had feeding centers for mothers and children. Many children were dying because the mothers were so undernourished that they could not feed the babies. Yes. The situation was so desperate, and we were trying our best to help, but it was very limited. And experiencing this, I really asked myself, well, what are the causes of this suffering? You see, as you know, in the Buddhism there's suffering, but there's the causes of suffering, the second noble truth. So I said it's good to try to alleviate some suffering, but if I don't understand what is the cause, the root cause of the suffering, this help is very superficial. And when I looked at the situation, I realized in the case of Darfur, the cause is very clear. It's ecological problem. It was water shortage. Because of climate change, this region, which is near the Sahara, has become drier. And then you have two peoples living there. Some peoples are farmers and they need water for their crops, and some peoples are nomads and they need water for their cattle. Now, waters had always been a little bit short, and there had been little, fights, but nothing very serious. But due to the climate change, the water shortage had become dramatic. Yes. And then, actually, when you look at the maps, where are the wars? Usually they are there where there's oil production. Middle East, and you just look at the world map with the crisis zones, and you'll see it's mostly connected with oil production, because there's not enough resources and people are fighting for the resources. But when the resource that is missing will be water, and this is coming up now with the climate change, the wars will be extremely violent, because you can live without oil, not as comfortably, but you can live. Yes. But without water, you cannot even live 1 week. Yes. You will die within a few days. So I realized that, behind this violence, the violence was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind that, there were structural problems, systemic problems, that we have built up a world system, an economic system that is destroying the planet and that is fundamentally unfair. And I thought, as long as we don't change the system itself, we will not be able to solve the problems of violence and of wars. So that was for me like an eye-opener, more on not so much on a personal, more on a global scale, where I thought, so what are the alternatives to the current economic system?
One could call it the seed of you coming towards Bhutan. But from working at the International Red Cross, how do we find ourselves sitting here and sharing this conversation, Doctor? How did you come to work for the GNH Centre?
Well, this is very directly connected with what I just mentioned. So that was just one example. But there were many situations where I realized, although humanitarian work is good and necessary, in the same way, then emergency is good in medicine, right? Yes. If somebody has an acute illness, you need to have emergency ward, and it's very good and helpful. But it is even more important to have preventive medicine. How do you keep people in good health in the first place? So if you see that on planetary level, then you ask yourself, okay, if you have conflicts, it's like acute sickness, then you have to intervene as a humanitarian worker, RCRC, UNHCR, and so forth, very good. But more importantly, what can we do to prevent conflicts from arising in the first place? So was a question I was really living with. And as a Buddhist, our aim is, how can we alleviate suffering of all sentient beings, right? That is one of the fundamental sort of objective or aspiration that we have, yes? That how can we alleviate suffering? And not only of humans, but of all sentient beings. And when you see a war zone, war destroys human life, yes, but it also destroys animal life, vegetal life, environment, everything's destroyed. Yeah. So seeing that, I was asking myself, how can I contribute to preventing these conflicts before they happen? So I started looking at what are the alternatives to the current economic model, because I was convinced, and I still am, that a lot of the problems we are facing today is connected with an unsustainable and unfair economic model. And so that's how I came across gross national happiness. And I was very impressed when I first read and heard about it, and I thought, this is the only example that we have of a whole country trying to go a different development route than most of the other countries are going. So I got very interested in that, and at that time I was still in Geneva at the Red Cross, and the Gross National Happiness Centre had just been created, and they were looking for a program director. So I, by chance or accident or karma or whatever you want to know your name, call it, yes, auspicious coincidence, yes, I came across this, opening of this position, and when I read what was expected, I thought, oh, that's exactly for me. These are exactly the competencies that I happen to have developed throughout my career. When I decided to come here to work to Bhutan, of course I had to consult on one hand my family, because I have children and grandchildren living in Switzerland, have an old mother living in France. So I had to make sure that everybody was supporting me, and they were supporting me, which was very nice. And I also went to consult my teacher, so Master Thich Nhat, to get his, his blessing, so to say, because I have great faith in his wisdom. And he encouraged me very strongly, saying that in his view, gross national happiness was a way to bring the ideals and the values of Buddhism into society. So he was very supportive of it. And actually he was even willing to, to come and visit me here, yes, but unfortunately his health has not permitted it.
Yes. I keep hearing about little updates of his health as well on my page, because I'm a huge fan of the master as well. Anything else that doctor would like to share about? Because going back to the milestone question, is there anything that doctor can share with us?